Welcome, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Lee Lowry, and I'm the Executive Director of the American School Health Association. Today's webinar, Female Genital Mutilation and Cutting, Strategies for Education and Prevention, is a very important issue affecting urban K-12 schools in the United States, and we're glad to have you join us today to learn more about it. Before we get started, though, I'd like to share a little bit about the American School Health Association. Otherwise known as ASHA, we are the only organization that addresses multiple disciplines in school health and that is devoted solely to school health. Our membership of approximately 700 individuals represents school health as administrators at the local, state, and national levels, as health and educational professionals in a pre-K through 12 school setting, and as academics conducting research that informs school health professionals. We're also the proud publisher of the Journal of School Health, a premier journal in the area of school and adolescent health. Members of ASHA can elect to receive a hard copy or electronic copy of our journal. Our membership fee is inexpensive and provides you access to the journal and also to our weekly e-newsletter, School Health Action, as well as free continuing education hours through approved webinars like today and through CE qualifying JOSH articles. If you haven't already, please consider joining, volunteering, and becoming a member of the ASHA community. Visit us at ashaweb.org to learn more. Registration is now open for you to join and meet like-minded school health professionals for our 2016 conference, which is going to be held October 6th to the 8th in Baltimore, Maryland. We will offer the following 4 tracks during the conference: Administration, Coordination, and Leadership, Programs and Services, Research and Emerging Issues, and Teaching and Learning. Visit ashaweb.org and register today. As I mentioned, the continuing education credit for today's webinar is free for all members. If you are a non-member and you would like to receive CE credit for this webinar, we require a payment of $30. After the webinar, you can receive 1 Category 1 CE/CH for MCHES and CHES, 1 contact hour for continuing nursing education, or a certificate of attendance based on 70% or more participation today. Participation is measured by the amount of time the webinar remains active on your screen. We'll provide details for obtaining CE in a post-webinar email that will go out this week. Before I introduce you to today's speakers, I'd like to share about a framework that unites ASHA's diverse membership. ASHA believes that schools have a responsibility to meet the needs of the whole child. The Whole School, Whole Community, Whole Child, or WISC model, developed jointly by the CDC and ASCD, provides a framework for the health and education sectors at the state and local levels to work towards stronger alignment, integration, and collaboration. This approach puts the student in the center. The goal is to ensure that all students are safe, healthy, engaged, supported, and challenged. This holistic and synergistic approach requires schools, students, families, and community partners to focus on improving both health and educational outcomes and to create schools that nurture and support all students. It's a team effort, and collaboration is the key to success. A multidisciplinary approach that involves school nurses, counselors, health educators, physical educators, community experts, administrators, and students can better leverage resources and expertise to meet the needs of the whole child, meeting the child's physical, emotional, social, and academic needs. Using the knowledge and wisdom of the school health team, schools can develop policies and programs that support all students, keep them safe from physical or emotional harm, and empower them to take responsibility for their own health and well-being. All of ASHA's webinars tie back to this model, and today's topic of female genital mutilation and cutting, strategies for education and prevention, is no exception. It will address the health services, social and emotional climate, and counseling, psychological, and social services components of this framework. A couple of notes before we begin. Your phones will remain muted for the 60-minute duration of this webinar. If you have any questions, please type them in the questions box on the left-hand screen, and we'll try to address them at the end of today's presentation. We're recording today's session, and we'll send you links to the entirety of the recording, as well as additional resources and to the evaluation survey within the next couple of days. We ask that participants not reproduce or cite the remarks of today's panelists without permission. So please contact me if you are wanting to touch base with the presenters to cite anything. Now, let's get started with today's session. We're pleased to have three wonderful and passionate speakers with us today. First up is Kathleen O'Connor, who serves as a career prosecutor for the Department of Justice. She began her career as an assistant United States attorney for the United States Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C., where she served as lead counsel in over 50 criminal trials. Subsequently, Kathleen served in several management positions in the United States Attorney's Office, including Chief of the Grand Jury and Intake Section and Chief of the 3rd District Major Crime Section. In 2012, the Criminal Division appointed Kathleen to Deputy Chief of the Human Rights and Special Prosecutions Section, where she supervises criminal prosecutions of human rights violators. She also serves as the department's coordinator for the President's Atrocities Prevention Initiative. Kathleen received her BA and JD from the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. Sarah Sisaye is the Management and Program Analyst in the Office of Safe and Healthy Students, Office of Elementary and Secondary Education at the U.S. Department of Education. In this capacity, she spearheads the Department of Education's bullying prevention initiatives and works on issues related to school climate, hazing, female genital mutilation cutting, and early enforced marriage. In addition, Sarah serves as a federal project officer for the School Climate Transformation Grant Local Education Agency program. Prior to this, Sarah served as a public health specialist with the U.S. Peace Corps in Kenya from 2010 to 2012, where she focused on reducing stigma and discrimination for people living with HIV/AIDS and also small business development. Sarah received her MPH from the University of Pittsburgh's Graduate School of Public Health and her BA from the University of Virginia. And lastly, we have Angela Peabody, who is the Executive Director and founder of Global Woman Peace Foundation, a 501c3 organization founded on the principles of eliminating violence and injustices against women and girls. The mission of the organization is to empower women and girls through education to eradicate gender-based violence with emphasis on female genital cutting. Angela is a graduate of the School of Journalism at Columbia University. After a celebrated career as a television broadcast journalist in Liberia and special press secretary to the country's first woman minister of agriculture, Angela immigrated to the United States following the bloody and brutal coup d'etat in her native Liberia. She developed the passion to end FGC as an advocate for women and girls after her sister was killed by her abusive husband and a friend of hers died in childbirth as a result of FGC. Angela is the former chair of the Washington chapter of the National Writers Union and served on several boards. Thank you, Kathleen, Sarah, and Angela, for joining us today on Female Genital Mutilation and Cutting, Strategies for Education and Prevention. At this time, I'm turning it over to you, Kathleen, to get us underway on this topic.
Thank you so much, Lee, for hosting the webinar, and thanks to Sarah and Angela for providing valuable insights into this very important issue. And thanks to all of you out there who are participating in this webinar and joining our discussion today. So why should you as professionals in the field of education or health be concerned about female genital mutilation or cutting? What is it? What is female genital mutilation or cutting? And why do you care? Well, the reason is because there are more refugees in the world today than any time since World War II. In 2015, the UN reported that 244 million people live outside of their home borders. And many of these people are refugees and asylees. And growing numbers of refugees and asylees are coming here to the United States. In 2016, the U.S. is scheduled to welcome 15,000 refugees and asylees to our country and 30,000 in the years following that. And as these refugees come to the United States, They bring their cultural practices with them. Next slide, please. In fact, the CDC recently estimated that 500,000 women and girls in the United States have either undergone FGMC or are at risk of having the procedure. That's here in the United States. Those women and girls are living or will be living in our communities and will be attending our schools. So we want to provide you with information so that you understand what is FGMC, why does it happen, what are the health consequences, where is it practiced in the world, and how does that how does that population affect the United States, what laws are in place to address the procedure, and how might you detect it, and what should you do if you suspect that FGM is occurring in your communities. So let's start with what is female genital mutilation cutting. It includes the excising, infibulating, or cutting of any part of the female genital organs for non-medical reasons. It is done for cultural reasons, and it is called different things, including circumcision or sana. Next slide. When does it happen and why does it happen? Well, in half of the countries that practice FGMC, the age where it occurs is between the ages of 5 years old and 14 years old. The other half happens before the age of 5 years old. There are many reasons for why it is practiced, including social acceptance and marriageability. But it's important to understand that there is no religious basis for performing the procedure, and there's no medical reason for performing the procedure. The practice continues. Even as immigrants come to the United States, the practice continues. Frequently, mothers insist that their daughters be cut because the mothers have been cut, and it's a practice that continues. Often it is seen as a benefit to the girls because it makes them marriageable and it makes them more socially acceptable. Next slide. The health issues associated with FGMC include immediate effects like blood loss, severe pain, and sometimes death. Long-term health problems include urinary infections, fistula, infertility, painful menstruation or sexual intercourse, and a potential increase in the risk of HIV/AIDS infection. In addition, women who have undergone the procedure likely will have problems with childbirth, and children born to mothers who have undergone procedure are more likely to die during childbirth. Importantly, the procedure leaves girls both physically and emotionally scarred. Next slide. So where is FGMC practice? This map kind of gives you an idea, a snapshot of what countries, in what countries the procedure is practiced. The World Health Organization estimates that 200 million girls and women worldwide have been subjected to FGM. 1 in 5 live in Egypt. As you can see from the map of Africa, many countries in the northern part of Africa practice the procedure, FGMC. However, it's also practiced in Asia, the Middle East, Australia, and India. It's more accurate to view FGMC as being undertaken by specific community groups rather than by the whole country, because not every woman from a practicing community will have FGMC or will intend to carry on the tradition with her daughter. Next slide. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, African immigration to the U.S. has doubled every decade since 1970. There are nearly 2 million African-born people living in the United States, including Nigerians, Ethiopians, Somalis, and Egyptians, all countries where the prevalence of FGMC is high. And those numbers will increase as the numbers of immigrants coming to our shores increases. Your assessment of whether a girl is at risk should not be based solely on the prevalence of the country to perform FGMC, but on a host of factors that we'll discuss in a few minutes. So who is at risk in the United States? Next slide. You can see that the states vary widely in terms of women and girls at risk of FGMC. The prevalence within each state of risk corresponds with large immigrant populations located in that state. The states with the largest numbers of African-born persons are New York, California, Texas, Maryland, New Jersey, Virginia, Massachusetts, Georgia, Maine, that's Minnesota, and Florida. The cities with the largest African-born populations are New York, D.C., Atlanta, L.A., Minneapolis, St. Paul, Columbus, Baltimore, and Providence, Rhode Island. As I stated, the CDC estimates that 507,000 women and girls in the U.S. have either undergone FGMC or are at risk of having FGMC. Those numbers include women who have already been cut, and those numbers do not take into account the falling prevalence in some countries. So some countries, the prevalence of FGMC is decreasing, but because the numbers of people from those countries coming to the U.S. is increasing, our numbers are actually increasing. The fact that it is decreasing in countries in countries across the world, however, is encouraging. So we need really, as we're trying to identify girls at risk of FGMC, we really need to listen to those families, we learn from those affected communities, and understand the dynamics of FGMC, because there is no one-size-fits-all strategy for addressing and preventing FGMC here in the United States. Next slide. Almost 1/4 of the African-born population in the U.S. lives in the metropolitan areas of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and D.C., Virginia, and Maryland. Other cities, as I mentioned, include L.A., Seattle, Minneapolis, as cities with large immigrant populations with prevalence from their home countries to practice the procedure. The next slide will show the numbers of U.S. women and girls at risk of FGMC by urban area. We'll take a minute to just look at the numbers and the regions of the country affected. So let me take a minute to talk about the law surrounding FGMC here in the United States. Next slide, please. So it's important to understand the law, not because we expect that we will be bringing federal cases to address FGMC, But it is important to establish with the immigrant population that, in fact, it is against the law to perform the procedure. So it is a federal crime, in fact, to perform or assist in performing FGMC on a girl under the age of 18, or to take her outside of the United States for the purpose of performing FGMC. And the crime is a felony, so it has a 5-year term of imprisonment associated with it. It's important to note that also that not just performing the procedure is against the law, but anyone who assists in performing the procedure or assists in sending the girl overseas for the purpose of FGM is committing a federal crime. The FGMC is illegal no matter the type of FGM it performs or the motivation for performing it. It's considered a serious human rights abuse. It's considered a form of gender-based violence and certainly child abuse. On the next slide, you'll see that in addition to the federal law, which covers all the states in the Union, many states have also criminalized FGMC. And here's a list of the states that have specific FGM laws on the books. The states that have an asterisk also provide for criminal penalties for persons who take a girl overseas for the purpose of FGMC. So there's 23 states that have specific FGM statutes on their books. And significantly, 5 states, that is Tennessee, Minnesota, Rhode Island, Oklahoma, and Illinois, also make it a crime to perform FGMC on an adult woman. So not just where the federal crime in many of the states make it illegal to perform the procedure on girls under the age of 18, 5 states also make it a crime to perform the procedure on any female. Moreover, some states penalize parents or guardians for permitting the act to take place even if they aren't the ones who actually perform the procedure. Next slide, please. Regardless of whether a state has a specific law criminalizing FGMC, it is clear that FGMC is a form of child abuse. And all states have child abuse laws, and all states have mandatory reporting requirements requiring medical professionals and school professionals to report incidents of FGMC or imminent threats of FGMC. So regardless of whether there's a statute, a particular state has a statute, it's covered under the child abuse clause. So I'm going to turn it over now to Sarah to continue with her presentation.
Thank you, Kathleen. I'd like to take some time now to talk about possible indications that FGMC may be about to take place. It's important that professionals look out for signs that FGMC may be about to take place. Child protection procedures must be initiated if staff have any concerns. There are a range of potential indicators. The ones listed here are but a few. That a child or young person may be at risk of FGMC, which individually may not indicate risk, but if there are 2 or more indicators present, this could signal a risk to the child or young person. Professionals should also note that the girls and women at risk of FGMC may not yet be aware of the practice or that it may be conducted on them. so sensitivity should always be shown when approaching the subject. Some other signs include a female family elder is around, particularly when she is visiting from a country of origin. Parents may state that they are taking their child out of the country to the country of origin for a lengthy visit. Next slide, please. It's also important that professionals look out for signs that FGMC has already taken place so that child protection procedures can be initiated if there are any concerns, that the girl affected can be offered help to deal with the consequences of FGMC, and that inquiries can be made about other female family members who may need to be protected and supported, as well as criminal investigations into the perpetrators, including those who carry out the procedure, can be considered. Some teachers in the United States have described how girls find it difficult to sit still and even seem uncomfortable, or may complain about pain between their legs, or talk of something somebody did to them that they are not allowed to talk about, as other indications that FGMC may have already occurred. Next slide, please. What you can do at your school. Please note, it's not the role of teachers, lecturers, and staff to investigate allegations of abuse of a student, and therefore, if the student is under 18 years, all referrals should be made in accordance with the relevant safeguarding children guidance. There are many advocacy organizations, and we will provide you all with a list of resources that you can use to learn more about FGMC, as well as steps that your school can take, but some of them include raising awareness of FGMC among staff. There may not be a good basis for understanding what it is, what it looks like, so that's always helpful. Familiarize yourselves with the warning signs that FGMC will occur or has already occurred, and ensure that a designated member of staff with responsibility for safeguarding children is well versed in FGMC. Next slide, please. When you're speaking with children who have undergone trauma, it's imperative that you are very sensitive and you give the child time to talk and be willing to listen to them. You ensure that a female staff member is available if the child would prefer this, and you create an open and supportive environment. Please note that alerting the girl's family to the fact that she is disclosing information about FGMC may place her at increased risk of harm. Therefore, do not approach the family. Do not assume that families from practicing communities will want their girls and women to undergo FGMC. And now I will turn it over to Angela.
Thank you, Sarah. Next slide, please. When is a child at risk? There are some risk factors that we want to look at today. For example, if she's born to a woman who has undergone FGMC, that is a factor. And if she has a sibling who has undergone FGMC, that is also a factor. And of course, if her family or she are from a country that is a high prevalent country of FGMC. But some other points to keep in mind too are that traditionally the grandmother or an elderly family member are very influential in the family, and they're very involved in the care of the girls. So the grandmother usually plays a key role in what is going to happen to the girl. Another thing is the mother or other family members might seem to have limited contact with people outside of the family. That is a red flag. And they might have very little or no interaction with the neighbors. For instance, the children of the immigrant family might not be allowed to play with the neighbor's children. ignorance can also be a risk factor if the parents have poor or no access at all to information about FGMC. And they just don't even know, they might just not even know about the harmful effects of it because they're focusing on the fact that is their tradition to follow. For instance, an example of that is they might not even know that it is unlawful in the US to perform FGMC on their daughters. Next slide, please. Let's look at a specific case scenario. Next slide. We will talk about a girl we call Fatu. She's born in the US to immigrant parents, which automatically makes her a US citizen. And Fatu spends her first 7 years in the US. But what happens to her at 7 years old, which is a very popular age for FGMC to be performed on the girl, her parents take her to their country under the pretense that they are taking her to visit her grandparents. She's so excited. She wants to meet her grandparents for the first time because she's never been to her parents' country. She might even share that information with her best friend at school and say she's going on vacation and she's excited about it because she knows nothing about FGMC at that time. But once they arrive in her parents' country, she's taken to the exciser or the circumciser, and she's cut or mutilated. And it's so shocking. Imagine how shocking it can be to a 7-year-old girl whose dreams have been shattered by that. And then they return to the US as though nothing happens, and Fatu returns to school. But she's changed. And although we would like this scenario to be a preventive measure rather than trying to cure it, and that Fatu was never taken to her parents' country to undergo FGMC. However, if this scenario occurs, Fatu will return to school a very, very different girl, and you will notice it in her behavior. Her grades might drop, and she will no longer be the same little happy 7-year-old girl. Her friend, if she has a best friend who knows nothing about FGMC and is from a regular American family, her friend will be affected because she doesn't know why her best friend suddenly has come back from vacation and doesn't want to play, and she's not as happy and jovial as she usually is. So we need to take these scenarios seriously, and I want us to look at what the result would be in this scenario. Next slide, please. So if Fatu were brought to you, how would you handle that? This situation really needs to be addressed because it's not only Fatu that is affected. As I mentioned earlier, her best friend is affected. Everybody who is in Fatu's school that interacts with her will be affected because they will notice the change in her. Her friends, her teachers, her school nurse, the school counselor, everyone who is involved in Fatu's life needs to be fully knowledgeable and familiar with FGMC in order to position themselves to help her. And getting to talk with her will be challenging, but I can tell you one thing from experience: it is much easier to get a 7-year-old girl to talk about what happened to her than a 25-year-old. One of the cultural approaches is breaking the silence after the girls have been sworn to secrecy after they are cut. You need to show her compassion and let her know that you care. The girls are told at the time they are cut that they will die if they tell what happened to them during the ceremony. So most of them take it to their graves. Most of them never talk about it. And that is something that's what helps to cause the psychological and emotional trauma to them in post-FGMC lives. Be very sensitive. Go slowly in speaking with the girl after you notice she has undergone FGMC or you suspect that she has undergone FGMC. Gaining her trust is really important. And remember, she trusted her mother and grandmother or a grand aunt, and they failed her. She will feel that they failed her. So gaining her trust will be really, really important. And if you're sure that she has undergone FGMC, as Sarah mentioned earlier, you don't want to approach her parents right away because they are not going to be cooperative. They will not admit that they did that or they had that done to their daughter. So you want to be sure and do your own investigation and confirm it before you even think about approaching them. Not that they're not going to admit it, and because traditionally they're told not to discuss it. It's just a tradition that they are not going to discuss FGMC with outsiders, and that includes the law or the school. But because of the sensitivity of the situation, I would say it's advisable to get confirmation prior to contacting CPS. Once you are certain that a crime has been committed, then yes, CPS should be notified. One main concern is from the communities with which I deal, it's that they are concerned about what's going to happen to the girls if their parents are taken away from them or arrested by the law. And I think that is one of the reasons why we don't have more reported cases from the communities in the US, because they are concerned about that because of the family unit, which makes it very sensitive since it's the family in most cases that are having it done to the girls. So most of those girls would require special provisions because of cultural differences. And I would just say if she has already been violated, placing her in conventional foster care could be even more traumatic for her. So those are the steps, and thank you very much for your time.
Okay, this is Lee. Thank you so much, Angela. I want to check in and see Kathleen and Sarah if there is anything else that you all wanted to add before we move into the questions section.
Yeah, this is Kathleen. I would just say that Angela's points are very well taken, but I would counsel that the child abuse laws don't require a level of certainty of committing a crime. It's whether there's a belief that a crime has been committed or that this young girl has been subjected to FGMC. So I would not say that you should confirm that a crime has been committed, but that you have a suspicion that the child is at risk.
Okay, great. And so at this time, I'm checking to see if we've received any questions, and we don't have any questions to ask our panelists, but I will share some housekeeping remarks, and I'm hoping that for those of you who want to ask a question that you'll take this time to go ahead and ask it. I know that I have a couple that I want to ask, but I'll just go ahead and remind you all as you're typing in your questions that we are planning to send an email to you at some point this week that will include a link to the recording of this webinar, and we'll also have it posted on our website. And you know, to the earlier point that we need to get all of school personnel, you know, educated on this very important issue, we encourage you to share that within your school communities. Also, as part of our email, we will include the slide deck that you saw today so that you can share that as well. And I know that our presenters mentioned a list of resources that would be available, and so I think that we'll have that as well. One other thing that I want to reiterate that I stated earlier is that our speakers have asked that you please not cite anything that they've shared. You see their email addresses on the screen here, and you'll have them again when you get the slide deck. But please reach out to them if you need to quote them on anything, because you'll need to get their permission. Okay, so let me check and see if we have any other questions. Oh, we do. Okay, great. We'll start with our attendees' questions instead of mine. So let's see. We have one that says, in terms of comprehensive sexuality education, how should we approach this with sensitivity and care? Does anybody want to try to take a stab at that one?
Angela, I think, do you want to answer that one and maybe talk about the work that you're doing?
Okay. Well, what we at Global Women Peace Foundation does currently is we work with, we had a 3-month pilot program, which we called the Kids Reach program, and we worked in conjunction with an after-care program and after-school program. And it was, I would say it was successful because the children enjoyed it, they participated. And what we did was we focused on understanding the cultures and traditions of the practicing countries, most of them in the world, because we wanted the children to fully understand why people practice FGMC. We did written and oral exercises. We told them about signs of deception and safeguarding, and we talked about vacation cutting and what it meant. So we also did a little bit of theatrical exercises so that it wasn't so one-dimensional. And the program helps the children learn world geography and history while learning the cultures and traditions of those practicing countries. So that's where we are now. And we also, in addition to the Kids Reach program, we also service women, young women who have undergone FGMC. We counsel them. Most of them preferred the one-on-one counseling and not the group counseling because they are still bashful about talking, sharing their story, and it's so emotional. I don't know if that helps answer your question.
Thank you, Angela.
Can I just interject? I just interject a little bit. This is Kathleen. I would say that the UK has developed quite a number of materials and guidance for talking to girls who are at risk of FGMC. So those are published materials. We can get in touch with our contacts in the UK and ask if we can share them with this group here. But they're very helpful. We've looked at them, and we think they're very useful in terms of answering this question.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I had recalled early in the process when we started to plan this webinar that there was an individual, and I was thinking it was Angela, who had had curriculum and educational materials, and so that's great. It would be great if we could share that with our attendees.
Yes.
Okay, here we'll move on. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry. This is Angela. Yes, we do have. We are in the process of developing materials, learning materials for the children as well as for teachers. And we started developing a training manual for teachers, for law enforcers, and also school counselors and nurses. And we have that. We are almost done with it. We're editing it now to make it available to the public.
That's great. And so I think this is the exact audience that would be very interested in seeing that. And so to the extent that we can help promote that when it's ready, you can share that with me, and I'll be happy to share it with our folks. I guess what was my other question? Would your website be a place where they can go at this time, the Global Woman Peace Foundation.org? Is there materials there that they can look at now until then?
Yes, there are materials we have on the website. We have stories on the website, so they can go there and look.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. This gets in line with one of my questions, and it's really more of a proactive question. So what sorts of educational success have any of you had with the families and communities that are most involved at risk? This particular attendee is potentially going to be working overseas in a very high-risk area and is hoping to get some ideas for education for those folks.
Well, this is Kathleen. I would just say that anecdotally, when we haven't reached out directly to communities so much. What we have done is reach out to service providers. So, for example, resettlement organizations and health professionals who are serving immigrant populations. But one thing that we have heard in response, we have a brochure that we send out, and it is translated in about 12 different languages, and it makes it clear that, in fact, the procedure FGMC is illegal in the United States, and vacation cutting is illegal as well. And anecdotally, we have heard back from immigrant populations that, in fact, it's very helpful to them to know that it is against the law in the United States, because many of the immigrants and asylees who are coming to our shores want to be law-abiding citizens. They want to be good U.S. citizens, and to know that, in fact, it's against the law gives them a certain amount of pushback to communities in their home countries who may be pressuring them to bring their girls back for the purposes of having FGMC. By knowing that it's against the law, by having this brochure, which is translated into many different languages, they can say to their communities back home, no, I'm not going to have my girl cut because it is against the law in the United States. So that was just something I thought I'd share with you anecdotally, which has been shared with us and may be helpful when talking to immigrant populations.
Great, thank you.
I would just like to add to what Kathleen said. I've used that brochure. We have used that brochure when we've gone into the communities to work with post-FGM women, and they found it helpful because not all immigrants speak English, as you know. So the fact that it's translated in several languages is really helpful, especially to the Ethiopian community.
Great, thank you. One thing that that our presenters let me know about that I want to go ahead and share now is that the National Association for School Nurses has an article that's going to be published. It's called "The School Nurse's Role in Addressing Female Genital Mutilation." It's coming out in their September 2016 issue, and it's actually available now online. And I guess it's available online for NASN members, and they're going to have a podcast in late August or September that may be useful for continuing education for school nurses. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a note to include that in our follow-up email for those of you who may be interested in that.
And we will be happy to send our brochure as well so that people can take a look at that.
Great, thank you. All right, just making a note there. Okay, here's a question from a school nurse asking, how can I help a girl with her physical discomfort, a girl that has undergone FGMC? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I would suggest making sure she gets to a doctor for an examination. But I'm an attorney, not a doctor, so that would just be my thought.
And that's what this is actually
my recommendation as well.
Yes, that's what we usually do. We recommend that they are taken to a doctor, depending on the age of the girl. If she's old enough, she can see an OBGYN, or have her go to a pediatrician if she's younger.
And
Lee,
Lee, I would also note that in many cultures, the procedure is not performed by doctors. It's performed by, just cultural, persons within the community who are labeled cutters. And so there may very well be a risk of infection and all kinds of complications. So the sooner that young girl sees a medical professional, the better, I think.
Okay, but just here's a question. So how do you do that without the parents? Is that something that's easily done without notifying the parents?
Especially if you're a school nurse, if it's the school nurse, then you don't want to alert the parents, I would think, because they are going to pull the child out, take her away, or pull her out of school. So.
Right. So I think that's where this is coming from, is how can they help?
Well, if it's the school nurse, she has the right, because the child is a student at school, she has the right to examine the child, and then she can recommend further medical care, which is seeing a doctor. I don't know how Kathleen would look at it because of the law, but from my perspective, I would suggest that then you would, because you cannot take the child to see a doctor without the parents' approval. At this point, you would have to bring in the parents, and if they object to taking their child for further medical care, then I think that's when the law needs to be called in. I might be, maybe Kathleen could say something different. I don't know.
Well, so I am a criminal attorney with the Department of Justice, and I can't necessarily give advice in this area, but I would say that this is where we recognize this as child abuse. So this should be dealt with as like any other form of child abuse. If the child was beaten, if the child was injured, you're going to call medical professionals to do an examination. So I would think that the general counsel's office for the school education department would have guidelines for how to deal with this, but like any other type of child abuse, that's the kind of procedure that you should follow.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. So once it reaches that point of a question of child abuse, then it's treated just the way anything else would be. Okay. Okay, let's move on. We have a bunch of questions. I don't know if we're going to get to them all, but let's see here. Someone's asking, they want verification. So is FGMC is a federal offense if done in the United States, or is it a federal offense if the child is sent to her country of origin to have the procedure done?
Both. So it's under the age of 18. Any girl, federally. So remember, there's federal laws and state laws depending on where you live. But the federal crime makes it addresses having the procedure done here in the United States on a girl under the age of 18, or doing anything to assist in transporting that girl overseas for the purpose of FGMC.
Okay, so do they have to start here? They have to be living here and then go and come back?
Right. I mean, so if a girl is cut in another country and then comes to the United States, there's no federal nexus. But if the girl is here and then is taken out of the U.S. for the purpose of FGMC, that is a federal crime.
Okay, great. Thank you. Somebody asked if there's been an increase of young women coming into emergency rooms in large cities as a result of FGMC.
We haven't seen that. So we've been going around to various urban locations where there's large immigrant populations from affected countries. We're not seeing that, but I would also say that doctors are not necessarily well trained in this area. And when they do encounter women who have been cut, it generally is women who have been infibulated, that is the most severe form of FGMC, and then they see them at the time they're about to give birth, or they're coming in for examinations, late-term examinations. That creates lots of problems, as you can imagine, in the delivery room. So, but they're not seeing them on a regular basis. What they are seeing is women who've been cut coming in for childbirth.
Okay. There's a question for you, Kathleen, going back to your presentation, talking about the higher risk of HIV, and this person's asking you to explain that. Do you have a reason for that?
I just think because of the nature of the cutting that occurs, it's done oftentimes by local cutters with no medical training, no medical procedures, no sterile environment, and sometimes it's done with a razor blade, which is used on different girls. So the prevalence of infection, including transmission of the HIV/AIDS virus by virtue of just transmitting blood from one person to the next, is a real risk.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have quite a few people who have kind of written in when we asked about sort of the child abuse question and how the nurse can help, and I think there's just a lot of our attendees kind of in agreement to that once you bring Child Protective Services and a physician in, well, let's see here, that Child Services can act on behalf of the child. So if they're brought into the picture, then that they can take them to the doctor instead of the parents. And there's just some agreement that, you know, this is really important content for our nurses and teachers to know in their abuse curriculum so that they can know to report it. So it seems like maybe they have something already that they're looking at that talks about child abuse, but maybe this isn't included in that, and it should be. Okay, here's one more question, and so it'll be our last one. So if a school nurse becomes aware of the situation with a child, should she contact the FBI as well as local authorities and child abuse?
I would say the first line of contact should be the child abuse authorities, the child protective services authorities. I mean, as I mentioned, we don't expect that we are going to be prosecuting a lot of people for performing this this procedure. It's a very difficult case to prove. However, we are looking and very interested in looking into whether or not there's any cutting going on here in the United States. That would be something that I would, if there's a suspicion that the cutting is being done here in the United States, that I would report to the FBI. But when you're looking at the welfare of a child who may be at risk or may have had the procedure, I would not report that to the FBI. I would report that to Child Protective Services, who then have their own channel for reaching out to law enforcement.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, well, I think that is all that we have today. We've reached just over an hour. I want to again thank our presenters, Kathleen O'Connor from the Department of Justice, Sarah Sisaye from the Department of Education, and Angela Peabody from Global Woman Peace Foundation. And thank you all for attending. Again, we'll have an email out with a bunch of these resources. And should you have any questions or want to cite anything that you've heard today, please be sure to request permission from our speakers, whose email addresses are included here on the last slide. Thank you again, and have a great day. Bye-bye.